as I was telling her, I never know how many are going to come, but we also always put it on YouTube, and believe it or not, quite a few people click on that and watch it, so that's pretty cool. I want to introduce our speaker for today. Her name is Charlotte Cook, and she's a local author. She has just published her debut novel, and she's going to be talking about that today with us. It's called, it's the first in a series of the Blessing in the Fire series. It's called Outside Looking In. Charlotte lives in North Texas with her dog, Skyrunner, and she loves writing. I think she's loved writing for probably forever. And before we get started, I would also want to thank Howard Davis, who's our sponsor this month. And she also teaches at and owns a yoga studio here in Greenville, and is a member of the Church of Christ. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Charlotte.
Thank you. Thank you. Can y'all hear me? Is it slow enough? I'm not sure. No. Is that better? No. Is it on?
Yeah, when you come over, oh, yeah, turn up.
Well, it was partly that thing out there, I just realized.
Yeah, it stopped now,
Maybe
so.
the noise out there. Is that better? Yeah.
Okay.
Got to straighten this podium, being a yoga teacher, that's really important. Have it lined up, if it bothers me while I'm speaking. Is that best? You can hear me now? Well, thank you for having me, and I was already nervous, and now that I know we're filming on YouTube, she just doubled my nerves, and I don't know if that's on the film or not, so I'll hold this up. But this is my book, Outside Looking In. I spoke at the Rotary Club week before last, and made it through the talk, and everything was great. At the very end, I realized I had never mentioned the name of my book, and I didn't have one where they could see it. They were down in my bag still, so I wanted to make sure I had a book up here. This is my book, Outside Looking In. So I thought I would begin with that. So I'm going to tell you just a little bit. I'll be looking at some notes and maybe reading you an excerpt here out of the book. This is my first novel, and I had to write this book. I was compelled to write it because as things happened to me during my life, and things kept happening, I would make notes along the way and journal some, and at times I didn't know why, but I felt like it was important that I was recording this, and I would just handwrite it while I was waiting in a doctor's office or waiting on my grandson at the orthodontist or something. I would just start writing what happened that day and the circumstances that the book's about. And like I said, I didn't know then I was going to write a book, but as things moved along, there's a chapter in here called You Can't Make This Stuff Up. And you can't make this stuff up. It happens, and I realized it happens to other people too, not just me. And so that was I felt like I had to write the book so that people would know when certain things happen, these unbelievable things that just don't happen to you, they happen to other people, but not to you, then that they would know they're not alone. And so after I wrote the book and all, that was right at the beginning. I published at the beginning of COVID and all, and so it's not to belittle anything. I know that other people have gone through worse things than this, but there's people who've gone through similar things. The name of the book, Outside Looking In, I knew the cover, and I'm not going to tell you what the cover is, but you may recognize it if you buy my book. I knew the cover, and I knew the title of the book, Outside Looking In, before I wrote it. Because the outside is being on the outside of the justice system and the family, and that's what it's about, the family being outside, trying to figure out what to do. So, just going back a little bit, there's in the book here, in the beginning, in the acknowledgments, and I thought some of y'all might get a kick out of some of this. And in the 7th grade, I had a, it's not acknowledgements, it's the author's notes, but I had a teacher, Miss Harris, here in Greenville. This is way back when, but I remember at the beginning of school, she told us that we were gonna be required, she was a reading teacher, we were gonna be required to read 35 books that year. That was every week but one, and it had to be 150 pages. So, I wanted, she figured that would make us love to read. Well, I wanted to love to read, and I did like to read, but I like to read and write poetry, you know, and I couldn't get into a fiction book to save my life. It just, if it was boring, you know, I just couldn't get into it, excuse me. So, when I wrote this book, man, I got after it. Well, it took me 10, 12 years to write at it, taking all those notes I mentioned a while ago, but then I put it away and I said, you know, there's no pressure to write the book. I'm putting the pressure on myself. You need to tell the story, but nobody's making you tell the story. So just don't stress it. Put it up, write the book, or put up all this stuff and go on with your life. After I put it up, and after 3 days, I said, no, I want to write the book. I'm going to write the book, you know. And I wrote this book, and I got an editor. I poured my heart out, and I had 70 pages. I thought I probably had 200 pages at least, you know, and I didn't have sense enough at the time to have my word telling me that, well, I think it had word count, but I didn't know how many pages that was. I don't remember now, but this was all new to me. I'm not really good on the computer, but I thought I'm going to like this book. So my editor told me, well, you have to let the reader breathe, and I said, well, that's not the way it happened, no. So I struggled along at first, and the story was easy to write because it's based on a true story, so I didn't have to come up with a plot. I had a plot, and I wrote, and eventually, I thought, well, okay, I had to kind of think about that, and I'd take my editor's advice, and I realized that it was maybe that I was just too lazy to put the work in to write the book, or maybe it was my ego. This is my story. This is the way I'm going to tell it, and it could have been a lot of things, but as I thought about it, I realized that a few workshops and reading a few books and studying, and I'd been dilly-dallying with writing for several years, and I'd read books about writing, but never seriously tried to write a book. And I finally decided that my book deserved my best, and that I was going to give it my best if I'm going to write it. I'm not going to just say, here it is. And she even said to me, there's more to writing a book than writing down, scribbling out your book on a yellow notepad and a legal pad. But I teach yoga, and so I got to thinking about, in yoga, the integrity of the pose is not getting sloppy in a pose, not staying longer than you're able to stay, doing what you can, and just the alignment and is the integrity of the pose, and that you're not pushing yourself. In fact, my yoga is called Your Yoga because it's for you. It's not what somebody else can do or what I can do and all that. It's for you. And I realized that I had to put that same integrity into my prose as I did my pose. So I made up my mind that's what I was going to do, and so I ended up writing a good balanced book. I was determined, I said not to write a boring book, and I didn't. Now I do go back now, and I can read, and I think, oh, I could have done better with that first chapter, you know, so don't give up after the first chapter, it's better. But the story is about a family that had a loved one incarcerated, and how they were trying to get him out and all. And so during this story, there's a lot of things touched on. There's addiction that's touched on, drug addiction, alcoholism, suicide, So many people these days are raising grandchildren, and families are different from when they used to be. And so the book's not about all those things, but they're woven into the story. The main plot of the book is about the system, and it's not putting the system down or law enforcement or anything like that, but it's just people don't know what it's like on the inside. That's where the title came from. And you're going to read this and go, I didn't know that. I can't believe that. And there's some good things, there's some bad things. And people have looked at a little blurb on the back, and I've got cards up here. No, I didn't put them on the table. It'll tell you about the book. You can get the book if you don't buy it today. You get a discount if you buy it from me. And you also, this jingling around here is a bookmark in my book. And if you buy one today, you get a free bookmark. The red thread, you get to pick one out there on the bookmarks, but it has to be a red thread. It's the free ones. There's a reference to a red thread in the book, and when you read it, you'll know why you get the one with the red thread. But when I decided to write the book, and I got serious about it, it took me just a little over a year, and I got out all my notes, and I wanted to write, because this happened to me naturally. I figured out writers, they write about, usually there's some truth in what they write about, even when they're not saying it's a true story. But I wanted to tell in first person so I could tell really the feelings and get into the guts of the story. And then I realized I couldn't write it first person and get into the minds of the other people. So I had journaled through the years, so there's journal entries dispersed throughout the book. And that was my way of being able to say some of it in first person. But I'm going to read you a little excerpt. You're probably thinking this is a gloom and doom book now, and I've even had people read this and say, well, this is going to depress me, you know. And I tell them, no, it's not depressing at all. It's actually a story of courage and hope and love and just fortitude, because here I stand. It's not a depressing story. So it's actually, and that's why I wrote it, is to help people know that if I can do this and I can get through this, they can get through this. And as I wrote, I didn't start out to write a religious book or spiritual book, but as I wrote, that's who I am. I discovered that just came up, because that is what helped me get through this, was God. And so early on in the book, I realized that, and I thought, okay, I'm not going to deny that and not put it in there. I mean, to God be the glory, because that's the way it happened. And someone asked me when I was going through these tragedies that, I don't know how you do this, Charlotte. I don't know how you're getting through. And without thinking, my response was with God and yoga, in that order. And I thought, where'd those words come from? It just popped out at me. And I heard myself saying it like it was somebody else saying it. And I thought, well, that's just the truth. And so that kind of resonated through the book. And it's not like what people call a Bible thumping book, but there is hope. There's some scripture quotes, some movie quotes, and some Ben Franklin quotes, and things where they were appropriate, because that's just who I am. And there's some of my poetry even in there. And so, Ben Franklin once said, and I love this, I've got it above my desk where I write, says, write something worth reading or do something worth writing. Don't you love that? And so, things were happening that were worth writing, so that's the book. And I'm writing a sequel to this book, too, because things didn't stop there. But anyway, let me get to a little reading here, and then at the end, I'm not sure on the time, so if y'all want to kind of give me a wave when I'm nearly out of time, and usually I won't talk over, since we have some guys in here, I'm going to tell a little fishing thing here, read some of it. I'll read according to who my audience is, and I was going to read part 2 about Mom, and my mom's in the book too, and she's no longer with me, but She was a big part of my life. So this is just these guys are coming back from fishing, and let me get back to my mom just a minute though. The reason I'm reading this part also is that when I was taking care of her and she'd be sitting at the table eating, and I'd say, you know, do you have enough? And she'd say, I've had sufficient. And then one day she said, had sufficient? And she said, gone fishing? She said, no, I've had plenty. You caught 20? She said, well, you old fool. You fell in the pool. And too hard of hearing, guys. So when I was writing this chapter, I had to stick that little ditty in the chapter from my mom, you know. So these guys returning safely to the dock, Jake exclaimed while securing the boat. Daddy, I think we would have caught more if we'd have had any luck casting for shad this morning instead of having to use those bought minnows for bait. All that work casting for nothing. I'm beat. Not hearing a word, Gaddy Joe shouted, Jake, let's get these fish cleaned and then we'll take a look at the boat motor. I promised a bag to the preacher, but you keep the catfish to give to Annie. He only likes the crappie. There's 5 nice-sized crappie, enough to make him a bag. You better keep the preacher happy, Jake yelled back as he turned on the water to the fish cleaning station on the deck. Yeah, bring me a bag. Bring me a rag. You think there's enough for a bag of crappie? Gaddy Joe asked. Jake shook his head and grinned at the antics of the 2 hard-of-hearing fishing buddies attempting to communicate. While on the lake tied to a stump at the fishing hole, they raised their raised voices carried across the water and could be heard all the way to shore. Jake began to laugh. Gaddy Joe, that sounds like this joke that Gracie and her mom, Marguerite, told me. With each one saying their part. 2 guys eating and a conversation went back and forth like this. You had sufficient? Went fishing? You had plenty? You caught 20, you old fool. You fell in the pool? That sounds like us, Gaddy. I'm going to stop right there and go on to something else. This next one is kind of I can find it. Thought I had my places marked here. Well, it's about cooking and the wooden spoon and stirring the cake and all that wonderful stuff. There's another quote. I had a note written down there too. It said, like, there's no agony like having a untold story inside of you. You know, that's why people, when they're grieving, you know, they have to tell their story over and over and over until they don't need to tell it anymore. And here's a quote, since I can't find my other part, I'm just going to read you this because it's sort of the things that are put through here, but also some hopeful quotes. This is from Charles Shaw. It's a program at Home in the Dark, and it was about depression and helping people in PTSD and how they handle it. Through hard times, life goes on, and people like us get up every day and face life. Some days we do it better than others, but we face it. Trauma never sleeps, and like a lifelong partnership, we can make it work, or we can make it destroy us. I decided to make it work, so, and thus I have a book. Okay, so the thing I learned through writing, the writing process, was humbleness, that I didn't know near as much as I thought I knew, and I still don't know enough. I'm learning all the time. I went to a writing conference on Saturday, and I was kind of relieved to know some of the questions where people were asking was, you know, well, how do you know when your book's, what do you do to make your book successful and so forth? And they were going, ain't you fun though? Sometimes it just happens, and all these experienced writers is like, this is what I did, but I went through this, and this before that happened, and then, you know, some person was in the right place at the right time, and they got a break, and, it was like, there's no way that you just, that's how it, you know, that's how it happens, so. Well, I'm sorry, I don't have my place marked there, but in the meantime, while I'm still searching here, does anybody have any questions? Yes.
You said this, this was based on a true story, that you knew about? Like, how
This
did that?
is based on my true story.
Yeah.
Is it like from your town, or within your family, or in the town you were
From
You're
my
not
family.
telling us what your story is. You're telling us how you wrote the book.
Right.
But we don't know what kind
The
of
story
story
is
we're
about
looking
a man
at.
who incarcerated in the family, trying to get him out of jail, yeah,
Okay.
is what it's about, yeah.
Okay.
And there's
Just the
just
journey through
the
that.
journey through that, and there's just a lot of stuff you wouldn't believe happen. You don't just go down there and get him out of jail, you
Okay.
know, and, and then the, main character in the story, she's trying to get this husband out of jail.
Okay.
And in the meantime, she's raising a grandson, she's got a daughter that's in and out of jail, that's an addict, and her son, 3 years prior to that, has suicided.
Wow.
Suicide, I know suicided is not a verb, but in the suicide world, it is a verb.
Uh-huh.
I mean, because they don't like to say committed suicide, it sounds like they did something wrong, you know. But, so she's struggling with all of these things. So it touches on a lot of different things, and
Wow.
what she did, and where she found help, and how she kept it a secret from, it was my story, and I have a yoga student in here today, Mary Alice, and, I went through all this stuff, and I'd just go to yoga and act like it didn't happen and try to act normal. And I was raising my grandson, who was ADHD. I was now at the school every week, and he was just challenging. It was hard for me. And so if I was upset during yoga or a little off my game, they just figured that it was my grandson that I was stressed over, you know. So I was able to go through this, and I finally told him I was going to write a book, and I wasn't going to tell him what it was about. So my yoga people are my acknowledgments, because being able to go there and act halfway normal, and you know, that's what, and there's, I'm at my place here talking about normal. Okay, let me read this to you, and we'll get back to questions. Thankful for any bits of normal activity, Grace was happy to stand at her mother's gas cook stove stirring the peanut cake filling that had been part of family gatherings as long as she could remember. This was right before Thanksgiving. Mama Turner had made the cake until her health failed. Now Gracie helped as her own mother's strength diminished. Her mother baked the cake layers the day before, but could not stand at the stove long enough for the frosting to thicken, so she sat at the table a few feet away to supervise. She had taught Gracie how to tell if the filling had thickened to just the right consistency. Gracie knew the secret to the perfect peanut cake filling, and how slow it stretched before falling from that wooden spoon. Perhaps Mama's wooden spoon helped the magic. Where are you going? Gracie asked as her mother shuffled across the floor to the cabinet drawer and then the refrigerator. Getting the wooden spoon and the peanuts for you, she answered. She strategically moved jars from a maze coming out with a pint of peanuts she'd ground earlier in the week and set it on a stool by the refrigerator for that purpose. Now don't let it cook too long after it comes to a boil. She patted Gracie softly on the rear as she sauntered back to the table. Gracie glanced over her shoulder. What? She asked as her mother snickered and smiled affectionately. Oh, I was just thinking about Justin Blake. He had the sweetest expression. That grin just made me want to pinch his little cheeks. And my expression makes you want to pat my big behind, Gracie teased. And Justin was born on Christmas Day, and he loved his Nana's peanut cake. It was always his birthday cake. The family would sing happy birthday, and he received some heavy-handed birthday spankings through the years as everyone took a swat. Yes, he was a sweetie even as an adult, and I know he still is, Gracie said softly. Tears filled their eyes, yet they smiled. He's having a 38th birthday cake on Christmas, even if nobody acknowledges it but us. She took a deep breath as she continued stirring the icing, imagining one of Justin's big bear hugs and gentle pecks square on her lips. Gracie liked to pretend that Justin was out of the country traveling, but she kept that to herself. I love you too, honey, her heart silently affirmed. So it's also about, throughout the book, how if people are grieving, the games they play in their mind, or what they tell themselves, whatever they have to do to deal with it, you know, and their special little quirks or things that they do to do with who they've lost, that it's okay, they're not crazy, you know, so there's a little bit of that through there, and then from the man's point of view in the book, we're not talking about an outlaw here that's incarcerated. We're talking about a prideful man that's worked hard all of his life and was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and how he dealt with it and what it did to him and his demons and how he controlled his demons or didn't control his demons, and how his life went. So, any other questions? I'm going to read one more thing. Yes.
You know, so many readers, when they read a story, they expect or want a favorable outcome. Does this book give us a favorable outcome?
Yes and no. Depends on your perspective, okay? I
Bittersweet?
will tell you this, do not read ahead to the end, because there is a surprise ending. And of course, it's a fiction book, so there's some subplots. But the things that you probably think that are subplots that really didn't happen, those are the things that really happened. But there is a favorable outcome ultimately in the end. It's a ways getting there, but like I say, it depends on your perspective. It could have been better, but still, that's where it becomes a story of courage, is when we choose our paths, you know, and what we're going to do the rest of our life. Do we go right or go left here, and what we're going to do, and do we follow or do we lead? You know, do we stand alone or stand by someone, or it's those choices. So, but it's not a sad leaving you empty. I did a epilogue at the end to tell you what happened to the people afterwards, so that you are allowed to kind of be okay with it. Yeah, so
Closure.
couldn't just leave you hanging. But there is going to be a sequel, and I didn't know that when I wrote it, and I didn't know this when I wrote it either, but the sequel's called Blessing in the Fire. I'm going to leave you with this, and if there's any questions, I'm not going to read anything else, but this is like, I wrote this, and then I came back and read it later, and I thought, I wrote that? And it was like, you know, I was being inspired from something, not just my brain. So, crisis and grief will never leave you where it found you, and we've heard that before. A lot of the things, you know, I've heard before, but this was just kind of came to, and I felt like I had to put it in the book. It's titled A Blessing in the Fire. Are you willing to be both burned and blessed? Sometimes we run from the pain, fanning the flames higher. Other times we are fearless in the fire, trusting we will not be burned and holding out for the blessing. Can we stay in the fire until we find the blessing? Can we welcome stillness as our companion? We must nurture our spirit in strife and in contentment. Surrender to the strength in your brokenness and hope in your celebrations with courage and faith. Sometimes the most beautiful green fields are those nurtured by fire. Embrace, surrender, and silence. Stay. The poet Rumi wrote, when you do something from your soul, you feel a river moving in you a joy. Writing this book was my river. I always cry when I get to this part. My river carrying me through the fires, giving me this joy, this peace, this blessing through Christ. May you discover joy and light in your reading journey and find your blessing. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you, and through the rivers, they shall not overflow you. When you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned, nor shall the flame scorch you. That's Isaiah 43:2. Thank y'all. Question?
As I'm a songwriter myself, and you do poetry. One of the greatest things I ever heard was from the bass player from the band Kiss, Gene Simmons. And he said that songwriters, or writers in general, they write every day. And he says the ones that say they have to be inspired are not good songwriters or writers. And he said that even though you may write something that is crap, per se, but he said there might be something that you write that you put away for like 6 months.
Right.
And then you're writing something that's perfect, but it's missing that one little piece.
Right.
You go back to that
It
piece
is there.
and it will complete it. Do you find yourself being a writer? Did you do that? Did you say, did you write some stuff that you, after you wrote it, you look back and you go, man, that wasn't any good, but you like maybe one piece out of it, and then you saved it later and brought it back?
Yes, and that would describe it perfectly, what you just said. In the sequel, I have found that I got some index cards. So when something would come to me, because I really wasn't ready to go and sit at the computer and start writing, I just write it down, you know, and you fill in the blanks later, because I find it'll leave me later, and I'll think, what was that good thought I had? You know, get up out of bed sometimes and have to go, you know, how that's like as a songwriter, and write it down. And just yesterday, and I was all excited, I wouldn't even bring that up, but I'm going to. I was cleaning off the washing machine and do a load of laundry, and I had some books, and the books are everywhere. And I flipped over to the last page, and I read the last line of my book. And when I read that, I don't know what happened, but the light went on. I had to stop what I was doing, and I didn't even have my glasses on. I couldn't see what I was writing, but I flipped open a notebook in there in the kitchen bar, and I just started writing this stuff down. I had highlights and sort of a semi-plot. I know what my sequel is going to be about, and it's going to, one of the main characters, I think the main character is going to be Adri in this book, which is the grandson, the young man, and from his perspective, that there's a lot of filling in to do. And I just had one of those moments where it came to me, and I pretty much got the outline within 10 minutes there, just jotted down the whole story of how it unfolds for the next book, because there's going to be some characters tied into the next one from this one. And up until yesterday, I didn't have that, and I just...
The next question would be, how do you get yourself stopped from rambling? Because several years ago, I started writing a book too, a Western. And from all the books that my dad used to read was the Louis L'Amour, and I would read them too, and like that. And I found myself, when I started writing, it was like I was rambling. I was trying to set up the scene, and I was giving maybe too much information. How do you stop yourself from doing that?
Well, just by studying, writing, and hearing other people talk to give you pointers. Like at that conference I was at Saturday, one of the speakers had said that you don't have to tell everything about this character in the first or second chapter. You know, it's like when you meet somebody, and that kind of helped me to think about it like that. When you meet somebody, and you've met people where they're going to tell you their life story right there in the first 15 minutes, and all about them, and their kids or grandkids, and whip out pictures and everything. You want to kind of get to know them a little bit at a time sometimes. So I try to keep that in mind, and he kind of validated that in the conference on Saturday. So you might make a note to the side that you wanna bring this in a little later, but not, and then when you go back, if you wait 2 weeks too, and go back and read what you wrote, you know, when I'll show you. Okay, so my grandson, early on in this reading, this is the first line in the book, okay? Sunlight streamed through the towering windows above the wide stairway and cooled onto the dull gray, oversized marble tiles below. Okay. That sentence, to begin with, it went on and on about the tiles and the sunlight, where it was flickering here and it was reflecting there. And my grandson, who was a big help to me, because if it comes in his brain, it comes out his mouth, and he's like, Grandma, that's way too many words. And I looked and I thought, yeah, I'll probably read that sentence and go, I don't know if I want to read this book or not, you know. So when you go back to it and read it, and you get somebody else to read it, and they'll tell you, and a good editor helps with that too. I was sharing with them earlier, I was talking before visiting, before y'all got here, that you don't use a lot of adverbs. You can use adjectives, but don't use a lot of adverbs in your writing. And that kind of, you show instead of tell. You know, if he's running, you know, and moving fast, you do something to show, you know, as he stuffed his toe, you know, as he caught it, as he, whatever, you know, moved on toward the door. You know, you don't say he ran swiftly to the blah, blah, blah. You do something where maybe he ran into the door before he got it open because he was moving so fast. You do something to show the action and not tell it. And so that cuts down a lot on your rambling too, see.
Gotcha.
And it's just, and that's why I say I was real fascinated with the process, but your editor will, that's important too. I got a Texas lady, because I didn't want somebody, I'm a Texas girl, I didn't want somebody from New York editing my book, you know, and I get Yellow Rose typesetting in Campbell, and that worked out perfectly for me because she let me have my voice, you know, she didn't try to change my voice, but she guided me through if I got, you know, like we put a lot of that you don't have to have as you go back, and once you see that she would, you know, cut that word and it read just as well without that word in there, and you kind of learn to be a little more precise. So I hope that for her sake that my next one, the editing won't be so challenging. Anybody else? All I can say is keep writing, keep doing it, because I never thought I would be standing here talking about a book I wrote, and say go to Amazon, or you can get it from me today for $15, and it's $16.95 on Amazon. You can get it on Kindle, and we don't write to get rich. I'm just trying to make up the money it costs me to publish it. You know, it's just that, like I said about this, just the joy, you know, of that river. Just to do it and tell your story. It's very therapeutic. So thank y'all for listening. I'm rambling on now. So I better rush.
Oh, you did a great job, great job. Enjoyed
Thank
it.
you very much.
Yes, we enjoyed it.
Oh, I don't know.
When you guys have your questions, feel free to come up and talk to her some more, and I'll see you guys next month.